Hey folks, MasakoX here. When this latest manga saga started, I had no idea that this would kick things off again in regards to this character. Bardock, post-Broly movie, had seemingly settled down when it came to his overall stance within the community. The impossible had been achieved, or so we thought. The mindless interpretation had become less egregious amongst the fandom, and things that were once confusing and baffling had become somewhat understandable and comprehensible. Bardock talked his theories through and explained his gut feeling that had been previously incredibly vague. Job done. That is until chapter 77 showed up! So yes, it seems that in the recent installments of the Dragonball Super series and manga, the likes of Toriyama and Toyotaro are attempting to make Bardock an even bigger deal within the fandom than he was before. And is that really necessary? I think you only need to walk around a convention hall for a few minutes or peruse YouTube videos for a few searches to see that Bardock has always been popular. While we ourselves have a rather lukewarm relationship towards this character, he's alright in our eyes, I guess. Ignoring the impact and the tensions between fans of the two versions of Bardock would be a foolish decision. We can't possibly snub this rather intriguing and downright precarious state of affairs that we have got going on right now. One of our commenters on our videos, Dark Tiger Shark Max, rather cool name actually, even suggested that we should compare these two versions of Bardock as people are arguing about them over their characterizations. Oh boy, it's just another sub versus dub or Captain Kirk and Picard thing again, isn't it? 90s Bardock or Super Bardock? But which is better? There's only one way to find out. Fight! Harry Hill reference to my British chums there. So let's get right to it, shall we? Let's really break things down and discover which version of Bardock is the better one, and could stand the test of time, become the definitive Bardock, and the future of the overall series going by then. Now, right off the bat, let's focus on the most obvious differences, shall we? Just to really test the water, distinguish the variations between them, and confirm to you all that there is a difference in their overall constructs. Let's head back first to the first DBZ TV special, Bardock, Father of Goku. The 90s Bardock is quite straightforward. Unlike his son, he is a lone soul, only connected to society by his own group of Saiyans. But even amongst them, he's a man of few words. They listen to his instructions and don't tend to engage with him in things that don't really relate to their present mission. He's a leader and a fighter. End of. We rarely see him talking to anyone else in other ways than perhaps laconic grunting or short statements that are very much to the point, and that's it. Put simply, Bardock don't do small talk. He is also less concerned about Kakarot. That is before he gets his vision though. You see, when we rewatch the scene of him interacting with his son, it shows a certain amount of confusion going on behind the scenes. Something that normally a Saiyan father wouldn't be going through. A bit of disappointment naturally, but then there's the inability to process his vision or feelings. You can almost see it in real time that instead of Bardock just dismissing his son as a failure, he just doesn't know what to think, or why his kid's crying, and also how it's getting on his nerves the way it does, but when he sees the power level, he promptly leaves regaining faculties. But when you compare that to the Broly movie, was Bardock a little too quick to act? Because in that similar situation, the power level coming up, Kakarot's crying is seen as a good thing. He's a strong boy with tons of spirit in his crying and shouting, and although his power level might be on the low side, he's at least acting like a Saiyan babby should. Unlike Broly, whose power was remarkable, but he was meek and simpering. He was a bit weird. Bardock simply misinterpreted it in my opinion. Granted, you could argue that, oh, that took place in a movie, but the Bardock special is a TV movie, so swings and roundabouts, chums. It is notable, however, that Bardock isn't indifferent to his son at this point. He just can't interact with him in any way, like trying to calm him down. This might not be a very Saiyan thing to do, calming a babby down, but still. His sudden reaction to the crying is hinted to have something to do with his new psychic abilities. Oh right, we forgot about the most obvious thing. He can see the future! Come on, I had to do it at least once, right? Would he have cared about his son's well-being all that much if it wasn't for his vision? The truth is, we don't know, for sure. we don't have that much insight into his mind since he's a TV movie character. Of course, he has the whole speech of being disinterested and mocking Kakarot's low-level status, but that was all before he saw his son for the first time. And, you know, it was his son's crying that might have brought back his consciousness. Just laying in waiting. That moment started something, and that initial reaction was something that he just couldn't handle, and so he chose to leave that stimuli to keep his faculties in check, not being swayed by those opposing forces of emotions that he couldn't understand. And these were really complicated feelings too, especially for a Saiyan. But we can't fully interpret them though, because as we mentioned, the 90s Bardock is a person of few words, and we have to judge him on his actions first and foremost. Seriously, if you haven't watched the sub version of the special yet, by the way, do yourself a favour and go and watch it. It makes so much more sense to our discussion. He definitely shares a close bond with his squad there, much more so, especially his best friend Tora, and is quite furious by their demise, something that is somewhat lost in translation. In the subtitle version, he does show a little more sorrow for their heinous loss at the hands of Dodoria. He also has a sense of honour, even despite his ruthlessness in other scenarios, and is a very proud individual. I mean, that makes sense because, yeah, he's a Saiyan. But, you see, that doesn't make him all that different from Super Bardock really when you boil it down, as both Bardocks in fact are responsible for quite a lot of deaths amongst the galaxy, working under Frieza's boot. Their original job title and description have not changed. It's not like Bardock's shown remorse for the cerulean deaths that he caused prior to meeting Muesli, Monaito and Granola. He's not said sorry. But let's get to the point. The argument that instead of Bardock being an anti-Jor-El archetype, he kind of turned into Jor-El. Something that is not all that far-fetched actually. That is until we ignore the fact that Jor-El didn't cause any carnage or the desolation of several sentient species. But the difference between the two Bardocks doesn't lie in their personalities itself, but more in their actions. The original Bardock was not involved in Kakarot being sent off planet Vegeta whatsoever. That kind of thing just happened, since that's where Saiyan infants go, out into space, including those who were relatively weak. They just got sent to weaker planets. The minus/super one was the one to initiate the idea of getting Kakarot off-world. Oh yeah, he was in an active relationship with Guinea, which, you know, might be the biggest defining difference between the two. In the original, we never saw Goku's mother, who birthed him, implying that, oh, that didn't matter. But as we know, having met Guinea, that really mattered. Because now we understand more why Goku is the way he is, and Guinea is life. I don't know anybody out there who has a bad thing to say about her. And to those who do, you shut your mouth. The Super Bardock is also much more talkative and open about his thoughts, and what he is formulating within his tactical mind, while the original Bardock, like we've mentioned, was more silent, taciturn, and chose to do things from the hip. Not exactly a super drastic difference, as they both seem to have a similar sense of honour and planning and battle strategy. And they are kind of ruthless to those that aren't close to them. In essence, they both have very little patience for stupidity, or the worthless. The main difference here between them is that the Super Bardock from the very beginning is invested in his son's well-being, instead of the original Bardock having just acquired it. Even though this is done from afar and in a more passive capacity, Bardock wants his sons to grow up to become big, strong men. An actual and direct translation, by the way, from the Japanese version of Chapter 83, and that's a little more concrete and easy to understand than them just thriving like in the translation. That's much more palatable than just seeing the 90s Bardock being confused and having a semi-existential crisis over his son not meeting a quota or criteria. This is an undeniable difference, but it's something that might have come from his interactions with Guinea, to be fair, rather than something that was fostered internally from the beginning. He also attempts to save Muesli, Granola and Monaito. This might make him too heroic for some folks out there, and then they have to draw a fan manga to go like, oh, that didn't happen, oh, he killed Muesli there! But on the other hand, Bardock is still interested in fighting warriors because he fights gas. I doubt that the original one would go the extra mile in destroying Muesli, Monaito and Granola, but he definitely wouldn't save them. He'd just leave them to their doom for all he cared. The only reason Super Bardock helps them further is that he might understand their familial bonds a little bit more, thanks to Guinea. But still, the man had just slaughtered tons of people before then. It doesn't, no matter how hard Monito is fanboying over him right now, make him a good person. If anything, he's only able to empathize with them on a very basic level, something that he already knows. And it's really interesting, seeing as the OG Bardock is confused by the crying and the vision. Here, in Super, he just knows what his thoughts on his family are. It clicks. He's not by any means heavily involved in Raditz's or Kakarot's lives, but such is the culture of Saiyans. It's to be expected. And to be fair, as much as their parentage isn't the most perfect going, I'm sure that most Saiyan parents would look to them and go, wow, they're really involved. And also, I think all Saiyan parents would want their progeny to be strong and capable, you know? Bardock being there at all is somewhat of a big deal as well. And we can see that with Paragus in a way, him being there with Broly. And we can also see that with King Vegeta to a lesser extent. Now that doesn't make them good fathers in our mind, our Earth conventions, as both are known to mistreat their sons or expect far too much from them. But we do know that, if just in their own self-service and self-worth, they do see their children as their legacy, and it's safe to say also that in his last moments, 90s Bardock did that too. He had the very same thought, that what he has left behind will ultimately be Frieza's undoing. Now to finally put this to rest, is Super Bardock more actively heroic? Yes, most definitely. But we feel that this doesn't come from his different personality, but rather from the experiences that he has had. Long story short, we think that the moment that he hooked up with Guinea is where the two Bardocks diverge, the crossroads. Some of you might say that the absence of his squad might be the other one too in Super, but joke's on you, my friends, they're in both versions. Bardock's squad were in the Broly movie, and only a few people noticed that. Even I missed that, Have had to point it out to me. We can see them through Frieza's scouter right here, and Toyotaro later backed this up by committing them to an illustration, which in his interpretation of events might have suggested that they were called to return to planet Vegeta by leak, but were then caught by Dodoria and his goons on their way back and killed. That would sort of make Leak their comms officer? The squad's guy in the chair? Maybe? Still, at least we know that Team Bardock does exist in both stories, and I wouldn't imagine that the relationship between them and Bardock was any different. Super Bardock might not have gotten future vision, which admittedly is close in cheesiness to the whole time travel plot thing from episode of Bardock, to be fair, but he does get intel from Lelek about Planet Vegeta's precarious position, which is a lot more grounded. And I don't know about you, but if we can agree on one improvement between the new version and the old one, that would be this. Having information instead of relying on weird visions makes more sense. Now the thing about Super Bardock is that we actually have more time to get to know him too, as we do see him in different situations, with his family, in peril, defending others, invading planets, whilst a lot of the 90s stuff we have to sort of piece together from one special. And it's kind of funny actually, because so many of you out there want Goku to reconcile with his father, but yet prefer the old version. I can tell you, if Goku were to ever consider this, the one that he would most likely want to chat to would be the Super version of Bardock, who at least has done something vaguely heroic? Because he would not be very different from the likes of Raditz or early Vegeta, the old one. Yes, he has fought against enemies much stronger than himself, mind you, Super Bardock also does that, but this was the element of his Saiyan pride that he shares with his father. And while Goku himself can be selfish and reckless, his core characteristics were always that he opposed the mistreatment of the weak by the strong. He wanted fairness. If there is one consistency, the heroic Goku thing, that's it. If Bardock was indifferent about it, either Goku would go on to make him care, or they wouldn't interact at all. They'd have nothing in common. So in summary, in our humble opinion, the biggest difference between the two versions of Bardock are more circumstantial. They come from different experiences and different emotional baggage rather than being drastically different in their core. They both care for people that they are close to. They both tend to fight against overwhelming odds, and they both can be viewed as ruthless yet honourable. The core of their difference is in their relations to their family, which cascades into different aspects of their life. Now, does this diminish Goku's breaking away from the typical Saiyan mold? Well, that's a discussion for another day. But as we see it, the Bardocks are not opposites. They're actually pretty close to one another. Feel free to disagree with us, but honestly, 90s Bardock has so many gaps to fill that it's really hard to say anything else about him rather than he's tough but honourable, yet uncaring. But we can agree on one thing. Whichever Bardock you choose and like, they'll be always better than this one. Yeah, we don't talk about this one. Oh, by the way, if you'd like to hear more about Bardock and possibly a story about him, do check out this one here, where the Saiyans in the original special actually listened to him. And I shall see you in the next video. Catch you later!